In today's episode, we are going to introduce co-ops and DAOs. What are co-ops? What are DAOs? What do they do? Why should we even be talking about them? Our two speakers have a long experience in the field. So Sarah, let's start with you. You've been working in the co-ops world for many years at Belgium and international level. Can you say a few words about your experience in the co-op world?
Thank you for inviting me. So yes, I've been working for Smart for some years now, but I'm here as an individual. And I've also participated in many working groups for cooperative networks like ISET, which is Industrial and Service Cooperatives Network. I've also worked in the International Cooperative Entrepreneurship Think Tank, which is linked to the International Cooperative Alliance, and chairing a working group on the future of work. And I'm also a board member of La COP des Communs, who brings together people from social economy, of which also co-ops, commons activists, and researchers. My main focus through all my professional life actually has been more about freelancers and how people work. And I'm really interested in what happens in the fringe of classical employment and new ways of producing, like in the commons and regenerative economy. I'm also very interested in the impact of digitization, especially in the cooperative world, actually. And I'm very interested also, and I've been focusing a lot on access to social security for these fringe workers and freelancers, and how we can create solidarities among workers and how we can redistribute wealth and so on. So this is a bit my background. So I guess you wanted me to talk about cooperatives, to explain a little bit what it is about. So I can jump into that if you want. So the official definition of a cooperative is it's an autonomous association of persons that unite voluntarily. All these words are important. And they unite to meet their common economic, social, or cultural needs and aspirations, and they do it through a jointly and democratically controlled enterprise. Every word counts, even though it's a very heavy definition, but I'll come here and explain a little bit more what it means. They are also, because there are values that are promoted and that are enabled thanks by cooperatives. So there's the values of self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality and equity, which is not the same thing, and solidarity. And it's really important to be open and socially responsible and caring for others in our cooperative. It's really the aim of that. But we're talking of these values and principles within a business. And so these businesses, they have agreed on a set of principles that they all have to abide to. And so there are 7 of them. The first one is voluntary and open membership, comes back in the definition. So you can't force people to work in a cooperative. The second one is that it's democratically controlled. There's a control by the members. And this organization of democracy is very important, that all the members can participate. And there's also a very important point here, which is one person, one vote. One member, one vote, sorry, because it can also be something else than a person. It can be an organization that is a member of a cooperative. The third principle is the one of member economic participation. It means that every member have to contribute equitably to the cooperative. There is a common property, and that everybody buys a capital, which is a share of the common property. And there are certain sets of rules on how benefits and surpluses can be used within a co-op. There's always a part of reserves that has to be kept within the cooperative and for the membership development. In some co-ops, you can have distribution of part of the capital, but not necessarily in all of them. The fourth principle is the one of autonomy and independence. So these are autonomous organizations. It means they cannot be controlled, for instance, by a government or by another organization. And it's about self-help organization. It came back in the definition. And it's controlled by their members. So the autonomy of a cooperative is very important. There can be some external resources, but the governance of the cooperative has to be democratic and autonomous. The fifth point, principle, is education, training, and information. And it means that basically there is the cooperative has a role to train, educate, and inform their members on various different aspects. It can be about cooperatives' values themselves. It can be broad education, actually. And it's important point because it means that it incapacitates the members to be able to govern democratically. If you're not informed, well, you can't govern. And it cannot be a democratic institution. The sixth principle is the one of cooperation among cooperations among cooperatives. It means that cooperatives have to help each other and somehow they have to support each other. They have to really strengthen the cooperative movement. That's what they abide to. And the seventh principle is the one of the concern for the community. And it's really important for the cooperatives to take care of their community. It can be their own community, it can be a wider community. And in the last years, we can see that there's a lot of concern also for the environment, which is an interesting aspect as well in the cooperative movement. So these principles are very interesting. They set a frame, but there's a lot of freedom within these principles to act. You can have, like, for example, when it comes to democratic aspects, you can have just a general assembly and board and vote for the boards of the cooperative, or you can put into place more participatory processes. So each one of these principles give a lot of space, a lot of room for cooperatives to invent and go further in each of these principles. Now, maybe before I close this introduction, I think it's important to explain also that there are a lot of different types of co-ops. There's producers and marketing cooperatives, there are consumer cooperatives, there are worker cooperatives, there are housing cooperatives, financial cooperatives, multi-stakeholder cooperatives. You can work with public authorities as well, and nonprofit community service cooperatives. I'm not going to go into all of them because I know some better than others, but I think it's important to say it. And it's also important to say that it's a worldwide movement, and so the cooperatives can take different, work differently in different countries or areas of the world, and also they are active in a lot of different sectors. It goes from IT to arts, banking, agriculture, even pharmaceutical companies, and they have a lot of very different sizes. If we think, for example, it can be a minimum of 2 people cooperative in some countries, and the largest cooperative that we know is a group of cooperatives. It's Mondragon, and it has 289 enterprises and nearly 80,000 workers that work for them. So it's really a vast movement. And what I think is really interesting is it's a movement that usually increases when there are difficult times and when sectors or activities are not taken into account by the market or the state. And just to give you the last figures, to give you an idea, there are 3 million cooperatives worldwide. They provide work and job opportunities for about 10% of the world population. And 12% of the world population is a cooperator in a way or another. Sometimes they don't even know about it. But if, for example, you can be in a consumer co-op or a supermarket that's a co-op and you become a cooperator somehow. So this is for the general introduction.
Xavier, you have been in the DAOs basically since they exist. If I'm not mistaken, you were in the Web 2 before. Can you introduce yourself a little bit and explain us how you did end up in DAOs?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, Will, and thank you, Sarah, for this great introduction. I think first, doesn't that sound like amazing? And like when I hear that definition of cooperatives, like I cannot help but wonder, why is it only 10% of the population? And what's that number in Belgium or in Europe? I don't know if you have that number, but whatever that number is not enough. And I don't know, I have a 10-year-old daughter. I'm also a climate activist. I'm preoccupied by, what's gonna happen in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And when I hear that, I say like, oh my goodness, I want to make sure that she gets the opportunity to work in a cooperative. Make a living working for a cooperative. So the big question to me is, how do we make cooperative not something on the fringe, but actually the primary economic model, economic vehicle for most of us to be able to make a living? But back to answering your question, who am I? I'm an engineer, computer science. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been living in Silicon Valley for 7 years, doing startups there in the Web2 space back in the days. Storyfy was my first startup. Then I started Open Collective, which is still around. And it was basically all about that idea of, okay, we have this amazing tool nowadays called the internet, and we can work all together beyond borders. And yet, once there is money involved, once we want to create an organization, we are stuck with 20th century legal entities, right? And so there was a very apparent problem for the open source community. So that's where we started working on. And so that's how Open Collective started. We basically decided, like Amazon AWS Web Services, to abstract the existing layer of legal entities, nonprofit around the world, so that any group of people anywhere can just spin up a virtual entity, right? And we can start sharing, creating, turning existing legal entities into commons, right? That people who share the same values can basically get a slice of it, so that in just a few clicks, they can, as a group, as a community, they can start receiving donations, money, and spend that money to operate. So Open Collective has been started in 2015. Now I'm still on the board, but I'm not active every day. Yes, since a couple of years, I've been following the crypto space for a very long time. And so indeed, when DAO started emerging, of course, became very interested, because Open Collective in many ways is kind of I like to say, the Toyota Prius of those new organizations, kind of a hybrid model that takes the existing infrastructure and offer a new interface on top of it. But the full electric vehicle really here is actually the fully crypto native organization, right, that we call a DAO, for decentralized autonomous organization. And maybe for people for whom it's the first time they hear that term, it's basically really the equivalent of a cooperative. I like to also call them digital cooperative. But instead of being created on top of the legacy infrastructure of nation states with their legal system, their judges, notaries, and then opening a bank account and all the work that is the bureaucracy that is related to that, where they can basically do that with just a few clicks online, as easily as you would create a blog. Well, almost as easily, because it's still a new world. So as easily as creating a blog 10, 15 years ago. And so, of course, it's getting better and easier by the day. But right now, to be fair, it's still a bit complicated, a bit geeky maybe, but it's already obvious that this is the future. This is where the world is going. Why would you basically create a cooperative on top of a legacy, very bureaucratic system where it's really complicated to move equity and all of that, if you could actually do that online, right? So that's basically what DAOs are. And we started a couple of DAOs, Heusch for Climate DAO, which is all about helping local groups of movements for climate justice to basically be able to receive donations in crypto and then spend that. And then from that emerged Regions Unite, which is all about bringing people together from the world of cooperatives, from the world of climate activism, but also from the world of tech people, crypto, and so on, and also healing, basically bringing all of those people, permaculture, arts, CSR, people working in social responsibility, like all of those people that want to build together a new regenerative future, but they each come from a different perspective, from a different bubble, right? And so what we try to do with Regions Unite, as the name suggests, is to make them meet and unite, because magic happens outside of your comfort zone, outside of your bubble. And so we want to make sure that we create this intersection between all of those bubbles and see how we can actually addition our energies or special skills or superpowers, right? So that we can move from a very polarized world today, very divided world today, to one that actually we can bring people together, we can unite them to really finally offer an alternative to the very united world of the degenerative culture of capitalism without limits, right? So that's basically the idea. We started that in Brussels last May. There is a second edition coming up this May. Very much invited everyone. And so, yeah, we basically no PowerPoint, only power circles. We curate people, we ask them to apply to ensure gender balance, different generation being present, represented, and also all those different perspectives to bring them around the table for the conversation. So yeah. And of course, DAO Brussels. Oh yeah, cannot not mention it, because every city is a DAO. They just don't know it yet. And so we are trying to, think about, what if we had to create a new city today, right? Can we create a parallel way of organizing a city and using those new technologies? And so it's fun. It's an excuse to bring the crypto community of Brussels together and looking for ways that we can use the intersection of that technology and citizens that want to build that regenerative future for the city.
One question that I have, like for instance, in Open Collective, what's the link with the crypto, with the blockchain? How does it empowers the DAO? I mean, I say all for climate, that can be anyone. What the blockchain is bringing to DAOs?
Yeah, so Open Collective, it's kind of a hybrid, right? Because it still relies on the legacy infrastructure. But so what we see is that it's still a bit complicated because we need to rely on what we call a fiscal host, right? Someone that is managing a nonprofit somewhere that is basically going to host all of those dozens, if not hundreds, of different collectives, and that basically needs to process the payments, right? So it's still, there is kind of quite some manual work involved. And so right now, Open Collective does not really make use of crypto, but a proper native internet version of that would basically be built on top of crypto. It happens that when we started this in 2015, and still today, arguably, because the technology is still so new, most people still have a hard time, and it's much easier to offer a platform where people can just put their credit card to make a donation to a collective, right? And so that's why it has been started this way. But if it was using crypto, we could basically fully automate that without the need of a fiscal host, right? Where people donate money someplace to an address using cryptocurrencies. And then the different members get to vote, make proposals on how to spend the money. And once there is a quorum that can be defined, the money will just go, right? And there was no need and no point in time to basically touch the ground of the legacy system and banking system, and all of that can happen in a fully automated way.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is like a DAO would use like the blockchain to automate payments and allow the members to vote for the treasury, for spending the treasury.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. What's the, like DAOs, I know they are facing some issues regarding to the status, because I mean blockchain and cryptos are still quite new means of payment. So is that one of the main issue that you're facing to fully go crypto with Open Collective and All for Climate?
It's one of the issues, but I wouldn't say it's the primary issue. I think it's still quite complicated for people to basically donate money using crypto. If you're not familiar with it, you still need to go through a few steps. So it's a bit like the internet in 1994, right? You need to configure a bunch of stuff. So I would say that this is the primary problem. and also like the fact that you cannot pay for your bread in your city with crypto. Maybe that to me might basically be actually the biggest blocking point, because what's the point of earning crypto if you cannot spend it easily, right? And so that's why I'm also quite passionate about local currencies and how we can use crypto to create a new generation of local currencies. So to solve that problem.
Sarah, I know, and you told me also that cooperatives are quite reluctant to use the blockchain. What's your reflection on that after hearing what Xavier has said?
Well, there's different aspects. As Xavier said, it's still very new, and for people who are not in the tech or the financial world, this is all kind of very, very, very vague. I'm still trying to get my head around it. For one. And a lot of people, I think, are still reluctant to crypto because a lot of people think it's still very energy consume. How do you say, like it takes a lot of energy for the use of it. And I just learned not long ago that it's not the case anymore, which is a good point. The second thing is, I think there's also the fear that there's a lot of money laundering and not knowing what the traceability of the money is. And when it comes to, if we go beyond these technical aspects, I think there's also a question of solidarity and how do you, I mean, cooperative world really started as mutual self-help for workers in the, you know, like workers, and most famous cooperatives started to help blue collars that were, you know, living in very difficult situations, and they had to rely on themselves for self-help, and they preferred to put money together to create solidarity. And in the end, those basics that came from the cooperative worlds ended up over 100 years later being the basics of our social security systems. And so there's also an idea that that you also have to be part of the world where we are, and you have to pay taxes and social contributions because it's solidarity. We all use roads, we all go to the hospital at one point, unfortunately, but it happens. When we have kids, they go to school. Those are all paid by social contributions and taxation. And sometimes there's a view also that all this crypto world is just about, you know, not having to pay those and invading that. And so I think there's a lot of things to be done by the crypto world to either reassure people that we can do something else or tell them they're right, and then nothing will happen, I'm afraid. But it was funny when I started to meet people from the crypto and DAO world, is that you have a lot of different visions there too. And I think that doesn't help. But you have the same thing in the cooperative world. In the cooperative world, you have co-ops that act just like any capitalistic business. And then you have others who are really, truly, you know, almost charities, kind of working, even though they're businesses. And I guess that these different views also happen in this digital crypto and DAO world. And maybe for the cooperative world to identify which are the currents or strands that are really in line with the cooperative view could help. So this is, I think, is one of the biggest thing. And also, but more than anything, it's very technical. It's like, how do I put my hands in it? And I don't know how to do it. And that's what people have in mind. But go ahead.
I think it's actually the main thing, because all the other arguments, they really for me, they come across as coming from a place of fear, because we don't know that technology, we don't know how it works. So it's kind of a bit of scary, right? So whenever we hear an argument that says that this is not the future, it's actually very reassuring. Oh, great, because actually I was scared by it because I have no idea how to use that. So if I can choose, I would rather not change my habits, you know? And you mentioned the energy consumption. This is solved already for Ethereum, which is the main blockchain being used for DAOs. And then for the rest, it's just a tool. It's just a tool. It can be like a knife that can be used to cook. It can be used to stab someone in the back. So So here's the same. It's like blogging, right? Blogging can be used by the extremist parties, or it can be used by people to share interesting content, to foster more solidarity in the world. So, so that's why to me it's really important to make the distinction and to not judge a technology based on the first people that use it, because that's a trap. Because every time there is a new platform, the first people who get to use it are actually the ones that have been excluded from the previous one, right? That's why there's been a lot of hackers and dark web, pornography and stuff at the beginning of the internet, right? Or people who were, you know, the MP3s and pirating all of that content on the internet. But of course, you cannot judge and limit the internet to just that use case. It just happened that for those people, the internet was not a vitamin, it was a painkiller. And the world of crypto is no different, right? The first people that use it are the ones for whom it is actually a real painkiller. So indeed, there might be some really bad-intentioned people, but there are also like a lot of really well-intentioned people. That people in Venezuela and Iran, in Africa, in various countries in Africa, in Argentina, in a lot of those places that don't have a stable currency, or that for whatever reason they cannot, you know, send money to their loved ones who stayed in their home country. For all of those cases, the current financial system and current legal framework that we have, it's just not working for them. So yeah, so this is basically a new paradigm. And my invitation really is not to focus too much on the technology, just a tool, but actually go back to the use case of a cooperative. Because when we heard at the beginning, the definition of it of Sarah, I think it's wonderful. And I want to see more of them. So to me, yet today, it's only 10%, right? And arguably 10% of the population is the number of people who participate in some ways, right? And maybe even not knowingly. I want to see like more than 50% of the people who make a living, right? Working 2, 3, 4 days a week, paid, working not as a slave in wage slavery, with all the burnouts and, you know, and getting more people to consume more and basically polluting more, right? I want most people to make a living working for cooperative, working for the community, working in democratically governed. And so the big question that I have for Sarah is actually, what is for you, and based on your experience, what has been the biggest friction point? And why cooperatives tend to underperform compared to privately owned entities?
That's a very interesting question that the cooperative world continuously asks itself. Different aspects. For example, right now, one of the major challenges for co-ops is to ride the digital wave. It's something that they don't necessarily know well, except for some cooperatives that are born out of the technology, like, I don't know, IT co-ops and stuff like that. But for the rest of the cooperative world, this is very vague. I mean, we're talking about a very diverse world out there, and a lot of really community-based. And so it's really living with their group in the real world, and the IT is just a tool, and unfortunately they're often using Microsoft for their mailing and for their Excels and sheet and documents and so on. But there is a debate that's going on in the cooperative world, is how can we make links with the open source and free worlds, because they are already developing all the things that we need, but based on the principle of cooperation among co-ops, we should be more using cooperative tools or open source, because often, indeed, open source and all that, when they have to choose a legal structure, if they don't use a cooperative, they'll use a nonprofit tool. So this is a great debate that's going on, and how can we how can we take this wave? Because this is, I mean, data is the new oil. It's not about using data like the GAFAMs. It's about how can we use the data to be stronger on the market and to be more useful to our community? And how can we propose also an internet that is more democratically governed? Because we believe that not only in Europe we have a better legislation that protects more people, but we believe that the cooperative principles could be ideal actually for the digital world. But we kind of lack the capacity to do it. And we are big institutions, and big institutions are as a movement, it's a bit difficult to move. But the conversation is happening. I know it's just a conversation for now, but the reflection is on the table. And another challenge that is linked to that is that you often need quite some investment in IT tools. And the issue for cooperatives is to attract investments, because if you don't have a lot of maneuver to pay back your investors in a capitalistic model, then you don't attract them. And so they're going where the money is. And so they're not coming to the cooperatives. And so I would link that to another major issue, which is the legal frameworks. Our legal frameworks, our taxation and so on, are all based on a capitalistic system where all we can calculate is what you spend, what you earn, the benefits. But we are not taking into account what are the social, environmental costs of the way we are producing whatever we are producing. And as long as we are not counting the externalities, cooperatives and let's say more, or structures that are more concerned about environment and society will always be losers compared to companies who are making benefits and making society pay for the externalities, be them social or environmental. And so there's a level playing field to do here, and there's really a lot of lobbying to do so that the actual accountancy, legal and taxation frames are adapted to the environmental and social challenges of today. It's a huge battle and it's not ready to be won, but if progressive forces come together, maybe we can do it.
So to me, like it's so interesting, and that I mean, a few things. First, on that basis, cooperatives should absolutely be working with DAOs. They are their sisters in the digital realm. Right, that's the first thing. The second thing to me is that, and I've seen that in Silicon Valley, right? A big conversation topic all the time was how do we attract the best talents? And right now, I don't see the best technical talents in cooperatives, right? For various reasons. So one way to solve that problem is indeed raising a lot of money and paying them very well, but salaries are really high in the tech industry. So I don't think we can compete on that ground. However, there is another way we can compete is by basically giving special access, right? What I've seen, I've been battling a lot after I left Silicon Valley to try to get, especially in the face of the climate emergency, to try to get my peers to, come on guys, why are you still working for Google and trying to increase the click-through rate on all of those ads? Why don't you join like some nonprofit or cooperative? And instead of building software for those big corporations, let's start building great software for communities, for cooperatives. And it's been really hard, but something is shifting in the past few years, where, and especially after COVID, where people realize that, actually happiness, being wealthy, doesn't really make any sense if people around me, if I'm not living in a healthy environment. And right now, actually, more and more people are looking up to Europe with all of those 15-minute cities becoming more and more adapted to people, not just to cars, not just to transactions, to relationships. So building relationships in a city instead of building, optimizing for transactions. And when I see that, I think like there is a way that cooperative, or at least a new generation of cooperative, can make it cool to work for them. Because to me, that's really what comes down to. It was, when I was a kid, what was cool to do was to start a band, a music band in your garage, because it was all about MTV. Then when I grew up, what was cool was doing a startup, right? Because it was TechCrunch, it was all of those. That was the cool thing to do. Now I feel like the cool thing to do is to live in a great city, workable city, and being part of a community, because community is immunity. It gives meaning to your life. You feel like you are having an impact. And so to me, that's the question. How do we make working for a cooperative the new cool? The way working for a startup was cool 10 years ago. And if we can solve that, then we're gonna have more people, talented designers, UX designers, engineers. We're gonna start building the best software, not for the Uber of the world or the Google or Facebook of the world, but for the B-Scope and other cooperative of the world. And then users will start going there, because this is where the best interfaces, the easiest interfaces will be. And so that's why I also deeply believe in the need for uniting regions. All of those people, there are people in the tech industry that are already understand that this is where the world has to go. Now it's a matter of bringing the people who are open-minded, both from the side of tech and from the side of cooperative, to say okay, guys, let's come together. Let's make cooperative cool again. And good things will come out of that, I'm sure.
Actually, cooperatives are cool again, because we are in a moment of transition, and we see that there are a lot of co-ops that are emerging all over the place in very new fields and different, you mentioned a few, and I find that really interesting, and I do think it talks about a shift in mind, in the way people work, in the importance of the impact of what you're doing in work. That's important. There is a thing in indeed, which is not inscribed in the principles, but is used by cooperatives, is that there is a tension between the minimal income and the maximum income within a cooperative, which I find is interesting per se. Now we could ask ourselves, could cooperatives enlarge this between, the distance between the lower and the stronger? Or we can ask ourselves another question, which is it normal that someone earns billions? I would think it's not normal for people to earn billions. I think there are different people with different qualities, and some people are more involved than others, and you have to be able to value that implication or those qualities of people. And so a difference of income within a company or a co-op or whatever is normal, but there should be a maximum tension. So I think that we have to make that cool again too.
I love the fact that, for example, at the B-Scope, right, which is a Park Slope style of grocery store, yeah, you need to basically be a member and contribute 3 hours of your time every month to be able to access to it, right? So it doesn't matter if you make billions or not. What matters is that you contribute to the community. And once that is going to become the norm, then people will stop mindlessly pursuing accumulating money, even beyond necessary, because actually it won't matter. If they really want to be in the cool places, they got to have to be able to show that they are contributing, right? In a way, I think, isn't it crazy that today in this current world of the monoculture of one currency, it doesn't matter how you get that money in the first place. You might have inherited it, you might have been doing money laundering. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the number on your bank account. And with that, you can basically buy a place anywhere you want and force yourself in a community. Well, that's not cool. That's not okay, right? I don't want a Russian oligarch to all of a sudden become my neighbor just because he or she has money. No, that doesn't make sense. People need to be able to show that they are positive contributors, right? And of course, it's the role of and the goal of all of this fabric in our society of all of those cooperatives to offer many different ways for people to contribute, right? It's important to be open. This is not, I'm not advocating for having a closed society, to the contrary, but it's more about making sure that everyone is pulling their own weight to the development of the local community.
Indeed.
So just a small note, B-Scope is a cooperative supermarket in Brussels. I think some people might not know what it is.
It actually is the actual concept was created in New York. The Slope groceries.
Park Slope, yeah. Park Slope in Brooklyn.
And La Louvre in Paris also, yeah. And but also, I mean, the cooperative world is really trying to is really reflecting on how they can show their added value to the challenges of the world today, and the aspects that are in capitalistic model really went wrong, totally wrong. And another aspect is also the democratic participation. There's a lot of people who want to work in an organization where they can have their say. And democratic participation within the enterprise is crucial because, I mean, as Isabel Ferreira says, you know, we have democratic countries and governments. I mean, you can say it's good or bad, whatever, but you can choose you can vote for candidates, which is not the case all over the world. But is when you arrive in your company, there's no democracy anymore. And cooperatives are a model where there is democracy within it. And then, as I mentioned, it can be very basic with only voting at the General Assembly and for the boards and being elected at the board eventually if one wants. And it can be also a lot more participatory. And what I'm seeing in the new generations of cooperatives, as B-Scope, for example, but not only, is that there is really a thirst for democratic practices that go beyond the governance, but are embedded in the management, with more horizontality, with sociocratic practices and so on. And I think that this is the new cool as well, but we just have to show it out there. But we also have to give the means for people to have a decent living. And well, that is very subjective, unfortunately.
So you're saying that people basically they want to be engaged in the governance of their own company, and that maybe why co-ops is back on stage. But I know engagement is very hard to reach already in co-ops. So what's the difference? What has changed?
It depends. It depends on the size. It depends of the cooperative. I mean, if you're in a cooperative that has more than 1,000 members, or if you're in a cooperative with a few hundred of people, or even a few dozen people, the governance is different. It's easier to have sociocratic practices and a horizontality when there are fewer people. It becomes more difficult as the co-op grows, because we're talking about cooperatives. But there are different ways of making people participate, and what I think is crucial is that people have to be able to do it. You have to give them the opportunity, and you have to take time for it. What I've seen in SMART, and I'm not talking here as SMART, I'm talking by my experience, is that it takes a lot of resources to have a truly democratic participation. And even when if you have over 30,000 members, you're not going to have 30,000 members voting. You're not going to have 30,000 members interested in what you're doing. And what I've learned from the Mondragon cooperative group is that people, because that's almost a world in the Basque Country where everybody does everything cooperative. They work cooperative, they eat cooperative, they send their school cooperative. I think they even have a funeral house that is cooperative. And it's super. But what they said is that, of course, I cannot be engaged in all the cooperatives in which I am. It's not possible. The ones that I privilege is going to be the ones that are more important to me. So first of all, the working place. And then for the others, it depends on my own personal inclinations and interest. Just let's all of us look at what we do. I mean, do we participate? If you're in a cooperative bank or whatever, do you participate to everything? I know that I don't participate to all the General Assembly of all the associations to which I'm linked. I would love to, I just don't have the time. But the important thing is to enable it, to make it possible and put the energy necessary for people to really be able to do it. And that also means clear information, transparency, and places where people can propose things. It's not just about voting what is proposed, but it's also being able to propose concrete things.
And to me, like, that's where, like, I mean, absolutely right. And maybe just to hammer on that nail again, like, It doesn't mean that people have to participate, but they need to have the option to, and it has to be easy, right? Most people actually are not, let's be honest, most people are not interested in participating in the governance. But every once in a while, when something is not right according to them, like they can get involved, and that matters a lot. And the other thing is, most people learn not by reading the manual, but by seeing what other people do. That's why transparency is very important. Being able to see that other people in the community that look like you and me can make proposals. Some get rejected, others get approved, right? It really matters. And that's where, to me, it becomes really interesting to see this convergence of DAOs and cooperative. Because in the world of DAOs, you have fantastic engineers, fantastic designers who build great tools to do the exact same thing. And so that's amazing because those are both required in the world of DAOs that is full of tech people and designers, and at the same time, absolutely required by cooperative as well. And so now, finally, in a way, DAOs is kind of, it's almost like a bait to attract all of those tech people that until now were not interested at all in building tools for cooperative. And now, without knowing it, they are building a lot of those. That's amazing, right? So I'm part of the B scope that we mentioned before, and I see like how much they lack sometimes, like, yeah, technical tools to be able for people to make proposals or participate, comment, or like this concept of shift, right? They need to work 3 hours a month. And then they had to build and invest money and time into an interface. It's not that great to be able to actually, when you have too many shifts, because you have more opportunities to work, because you are retired or whatever, then you have those solidarity shifts, right? And you can actually give a shift to other people because maybe someone is sick, right? And you want to, again, actually show solidarity. But all of that had to be built just for that cooperative, right? And that's actually exactly the same concept of tokens in a DAO. So we see now how all of this is going to eventually converge. And now in the future, not that far in the future, I'll be able to have a wallet on my phone where I'm going to be able to also have those shifts of the B scope, and I'm going to be able to.
Xavier, can you maybe explain a bit what a token is and why it's important to DAOs? Because I'm not sure we all have that in mind.
So, but a token is basically kind of can be seen as a share of the community, but that can have a utility, right? So typically, it can be seen, it's a new animal, right? So it kind of has different perspective, right? One perspective is to say it's a share, like a startup, and where you will pay people with money, but also with shares of the startup, right? So that people get to participate in the co-ownership of the company. And another way to look at it is the example I just gave, which is the concept of shift, right? Where people give 3 hours of their time per month, they might actually earn a token, right? That represents a shift. The thing is that unlike anything that existed so far in the digital world, a token is akin a real physical token, really, in the sense that once I receive a coin, I'm free to give it to you. I don't need to ask anybody else permission, right? So a token is a digital version of that. So now a cooperative can issue those tokens to the community for various reasons, because they've contributed, because they do shifts or whatever. And the people in the community are now the full owners of those tokens. It's up to them to give them in a peer-to-peer fashion to whoever they want. And that's how there is kind of, it offers new possibilities. That's how in some DAOs, those tokens have a financial value. In most DAOs, I mean, not necessarily, right? Because just a token, it only has value and meaning within the community. But the point is that now that we have this concept on a digital level, at the level of the internet, it means that we're going to be able to start developing those tools in open source in ways that's going to be useful for the cooperative in Park Slope in Brooklyn, and for the B scope, because they both share the same database, which is the blockchain, right? So it really enables a new level of collaboration at the level of the planet to develop more tools for shared governance, shared ownership, and therefore all of those new cooperatives. And that's why I'm like the internet, in a matter of 1 decade or two, kind of took over, and now it's everyone has the internet in their pocket. I'm convinced that this new internet of money, this new internet of tokens, this new internet of cooperative will basically make cooperative much bigger than they are today, and will make cooperative the new default economic vehicle entity where most people will be able to make a living. And I'm really excited about that.
So thanks. So I understand like token is kind of proof of ownership. It's money, it can be salary, it can also be votes. But now I have a question for both of you, because I know that here there is a very different points, different views on that. But I know co-ops, 1 person, 1 vote, 1 member, 1 vote. But as far as I know, in DAOs, we're not that. It's the number of token that's weighted to vote. So is that something that can be dealt with?
Yeah, so the thing is that it's more like a technical reason, right? Because in the world, on the internet, like it's really hard to prove that you are not a dog behind the screen, right? It's really hard to prove that you are not a human, that it's not a bot, right? And so that's what we refer to as a Sybil attack. Basically the ability for one individual to create many accounts. So you think it's many different people, but actually it's only 1 person, right? And because right now there is no good solution to that problem yet, you cannot enforce 1 person, 1 vote. So in many ways, the cooperative is kind of a subset of DAOs. It's a DAO that enforces 1 person, 1 vote. And they can do it because cooperative tend to be mostly in the real world, where they meet people face to face. So it's easy to make sure that there is a person behind someone, right? That has some ownership, some tokens.
So Sarah, what you think of that? What you think of this voting system? And do you think co-ops can ever use tokens?
So as to the vote, I think that indeed there's a danger. And as I said, there are also very big cooperatives where we are not all face-to-face at the General Assemblies, but there's also always, because as you say, we're in the real world, there's also always an identifier at one point, so we can make sure that even if the person votes online, the person has 1 vote. I'm sure that you guys can find the technology to do that. Give it a few years and really make it an objective, and I'm sure you can do it. But I think it's really important, because otherwise it's just the same as in a capitalistic organization. The more the shares, the more the vote, and the winner takes all, basically. And that's a democratic problem. So I'm sure that if there is a will, there is a way for votes in DAOs to be linked to 1 member, 1 vote. And I also wanted to come back, if I can, Will, on one thing that Xavier said about technology. I think that one of the difficulties for the cooperative world to really ride and be part of the digital wave is also because there are so many tools out there. I mean, I know myself, I'm far from a tech savvy, if not even a tech repellent. I will only use what I need to. And even though with all the working groups, I don't know how many tools are on my computer, and I'm even just so bored. Okay, where how does this one function? So we have to. It would be interesting for the tech world and also for the cooperative world to have a more like, I don't say 1 tool, but something more interoperable, more that people don't have to reinvent the wheel anymore. But I know that interoperability is really a key thing, and it could really strengthen the cooperative world. But often, as I said, people in the cooperative world, apart those who are in the tech industries, they don't know what, it's not their field of expertise, right? And And so when there are proposed tools, they don't see what the difference, because I remember this one, this CEO of a co-op saying, okay, I see 4 different tech guys and I ask for this, this, and this feature. And they all say, yes, of course I can do it. And I have no way of understanding which one is the most adapted to what I need. And so people go for what they're used to, basically. And there's something to do, there's something about the tech world being able to discuss better with people from the real world. For one, I think that is important to help the cooperative world also go digital, and especially help them in the interoperability aspects, because this is what is going to make the cooperative world stronger and more mainstream.
Yeah, and I think interoperability, the mouthful, is actually, it's the essence of those DAOs, right? Because they all share the same database. So they are by design interoperable. And to me, like, that's a big thing. I think we should stay away, even though it's really tempting, we should stay away from one size fits all unique platform. I understand it's easier for people to understand, but really, if actually there is interoperability from the get-go by design, then it's irrelevant. People won't have to create a login and password on 20 different platforms. They will have to do it only once, right? But then different features will be developed by different people. And I think that's great. One thing that I think might be controversial here, but I think that this idea of one person, one vote is a bit dogmatic, because it depends on the context. And we've seen it with Brexit. Not everyone has the same level of information, had the same amount of time at their disposal to actually read the documentation, get interested, watch videos, and so on, before they were able to vote. As a consequence, I'm not sure that one person, one vote is the best way for the democracy, for the people to be able to go, to make good decisions together. But of course, it's really different at this level of a country than at the level of a local cooperative. So it really depends on the context. So one thing that are being experimented with, and that's why I also love DAOs, because you basically create a cooperative with a few clicks and at almost zero cost. So because of that, you can experiment, you can fail, because it doesn't cost you much. It doesn't cost you months to create it. It takes months to create a cooperative, right? So you think twice before going crazy and experiment with stuff, right? So, but in DAOs, you can really experiment. And so some of the experiments that have been used recently is all of this concept of what we call quadratic voting and quadratic funding. And the idea is the following, is to be able to say, like, you know what, it's not okay to have one vote, yes or no. We should be able to express the intensity. How much do you believe in that? How much do you care? And a good example of that in the academic paper that talked about the concept was the concept of homosexual marriage, right? Where if you are homosexual yourself, you're gonna deeply care about it. If you're not homosexual, actually, it doesn't really matter to you. Like, you are free not to marry someone of the same gender, right? And yet, in one person, one vote, you both have the same equal weight, and that's not really doesn't lead to the best outcome. And so the idea of quadratic funding is to say, like, you know what, we want to find the right balance between, at the same time, allowing people who really deeply care to express the intensity that they want, without allowing them to basically buy the elections, which is, of course, the other extreme that also needs to be avoided. And the idea is to basically enable people to have more than one vote, but at a quadratic cost. So 1 vote, €1, to take an example. If you want to have 2 votes, €2, 4 euros the square, 3 votes, €9, 4 votes, €16, and so on and so on. So it becomes exponentially expensive to have more weight in the election. But it's kind of a good balance. And this is just one example among others, where we can see that, okay, we are still researching, we are still experimenting with different ways and see in which context, which way is better. And so, yeah, and that's why to me, like, cooperative is more kind of a subset of DAOs in general.
It's interesting what you say. I mean, I believe that it's important to have one person, one vote, because there's a danger of, if it's about the money, it's not the right place to put the weight of the vote, let's say. But the interesting thing about tokens is also the recognition of the participation of the person, if I understood clearly, in certain models. And that, I think, is very interesting, because and to have a good democratic process, you need the information, you need people to exchange. And the issue also linked to digitization and social, and and all the social networks, is that they are written, the algorithms are written so that each of us go deeper into our most let's say extreme thoughts. And so you will be meeting only people with the same thoughts and even more extreme than yours. And so there's kind of we're all kind of in our own fish bowls. And a democracy needs an ocean. It needs people to meet but that has to be created. It needs a dialogue. It needs different ways of selecting people as well. And these are things that are happening also. I've also experimented the random selection, which is another way of making people participate, which is really interesting, but it's another topic. But to come back on the question of the token. But to come back on the topic of the tokens, what can be interesting is that there's the participation of members in the cooperatives are not paid. Like, if you want to participate in a working group or in certain debates, you're not going to be paid for that work, but you are contributing to the well-being of the cooperative. So I think that, and also we could extend it even to the commons world, where people contribute but don't get back. And it's not the objective, but it's nice for people to be recognized for the work and the contribution that they've had. And it could also be a way of saying to people who don't know who are all the other cooperators or commoners, well, this guy or this woman really did a lot. So, maybe you should listen to what this person has to say. And tokens could be a way of having a non-monetary recognition that gives way and maybe some retribution that are not necessarily monetary, because I think we need to think of other ways of retribution and recognizing people as well. And that I find very interesting in the token aspect of the DAOs.
Totally. I think, and to continue on that, and indeed, we could actually also create a gate for people to vote. They need to show that they've maybe attended certain workshops to make sure that they get the information to be able to vote, right? So there's a lot of different ways to solve that. And basically DAOs and all of those related technologies are basically just giving us new tools to offer, to create way much more flexibility, right, in the world of cooperative that there used to be. And to me, that's why I also like to compare that with blogging compared to newspapers. It's like cooperative are newspapers, when they need to be printed. So because of that, you have a deadline. And because of that, you can only fit so many different articles, right? Because they need to be put in columns, and there is all of those restrictions, right? And then you need to print it physically and then bring it to the people. And then you have blogging, right? And online online media, where there is basically no limitation anymore on what gets to be on the homepage, right? It can be a lot. They can be defined by more people can contribute. And so to me, this is kind of the same paradigm shift that is happening. And it's not that it's going to bring new problems for sure, but it also creates more new alternative ways to, in the case of blogging, get information. By the way, a big part, thanks to which we actually are aware of the climate emergency, right? We knew about it in the 70s already behind closed doors. And it's only thanks to an open internet that enabled many more voices to get access to sharing information that we get to know all of those topics that used to be behind closed doors. So I think it's generally a good thing, even though, of course, it brings new problems. But because it's going to bring new problems that when 50% of the population will be making a living working for cooperatives, right? It's not always easy. I'm sure Sarah has a lot of experience with that that she could share. But yeah.
Bloggers also need some verified information that is printed in paper.
That's right. With this one, we need both, right? But paper used to be the primary way by far that people get their information from, right? And now it's not the majority anymore, right? It's a minority, and I think the same is going to happen with
Or
with
worse,
DAOs. Sorry.
For better or worse, that's now the most the current, I agree that there needs a diversity, and actually I find that the cooperative world has adapted quite a lot, from the Industrial Revolution to today's world of services. It has evolved a lot, and I think it also has a lot of potential to make links between. I'm a very big fan of multi-stakeholder cooperatives, which is a model of a cooperative where you can have different stakeholders, as it says. But for example, if you're thinking of a city, the transition, environmental transition, you can have a cooperative that is owned by, where the stakeholders are the city, the citizens, or the user of a service, and the workers of the service, and maybe other organizations that you may want to have, like unions for working conditions as well. And those times of transition are very interesting. What I mean by that is that the cooperative, even though it's a very old model, it has this capacity to adapt to the different challenges. And and that's why, indeed, every time there is a crisis, where that's where cooperatives are booming again, and cooperatives are booming again. In Belgium, we've never seen so many cooperatives as we have in the last decade, and c'est pas pour rien, as we say in French. And I strongly believe that there is really a strength there. And there's the cooperative movements, there are the official institutions, and there are the people who are grassrooted and who are creating those cooperatives. And the swiftness to adapt is very different following the type of cooperative or the level of the institution you're looking at. But I think that there's a lot of interesting things that can happen. And I think that co-ops need to learn from new ways of functioning in different aspects. We've tackled a few today, and I hope we'll have the opportunity to tackle some others more in depth later on. But you also need to have a link with the state. And I know that sometimes now we feel that the state or the people who represent us are far away from us, but the institutions that are there, as I mentioned, we are using streets, we are sending our kids to school, and we still have to participate to that solidarity and maybe recreate new ones. But we have to make the link between that digital world and the real world, and think of this transition of where we're going, and how, now that everything is being experimented, how we can still make a link with the real world and make sure that they contribute to these solidarities. And yeah, I think we have a lot to learn from each other, and we just have to have an in-depth analysis.
to keep talking. Xavier,
Yeah.
do you have like one
No,
more
I
word
want to see.
close?
Yeah, I want to see more like cooperative schools, cooperative hospitals, all of those things, and cooperative cities. Right? I'm not so much. I don't know. I still need to be convinced that the current institutions can adapt to this new climate emergency, new reality, and economic crisis, and all of the things that are actually coming our way right now. But I'm willing to be convinced. But I also know that I want to see that it belongs to us. Like, I don't want to wait for them. The invitation is open, but I don't want to wait for them. I want to focus with a coalition of the willings. Okay, let's build those cooperative hospitals. Let's build those cooperative schools. Let's build those cooperative commons and new cities. And maybe some cities, some regions will be smarter than others and will embrace that movement. That's for sure my wish, I hope. But let's not wait for them. I think together we already have everything we need. And especially if we can unite. If we can unite the talents that are in cooperative, that have all the experience like Sarah has, and the talents that come from the tech world, and then many others. And if we unite, geez, man, we gotta do great things together.
Thanks for that. I think that's exactly what we are talking about. Thanks, Xavier. Thanks, Sarah. That was very, very interesting. I have the feeling that we could keep talking about the topic for for hours, but we learn already a lot. We learn a lot about DAOs, what they do, how they work, what is a token. We learn about co-ops also, where they come from, how they work, what the challenges they are facing. So I think we can stop that for today. Next episode in a few weeks. That's going to be also very interesting, with also people from the co-ops, from the DAO worlds. We're gonna surprise for the next episode. So we hope you enjoyed this discussion, and stay tuned. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Sarah.